Well, hello and welcome to the Creating Connections podcast, where I bring voices and perspectives from people who are making a difference for children's learning and development. I'm Rachel Stewart and I'm passionate about connecting with people to share experiences and learn from each other how we can best support children to thrive. In this series of the podcast, I interview successful leaders in education so you can learn from a diverse range of people what makes a successful leader and how you can take their learnings and apply them to your leadership. Today, I'm introducing you to Michael Lawrence. Michael has a long history in education with over 30 years teaching experience. He's also a writer with a unique expertise in education and music. For over 25 years, he's authored several books, articles, and programs that showcase his in-depth knowledge, research, and perspectives on these topics. In addition, he's provided education commentary on radio and presented Teacher Trust, a professional development program in partnership with Tampere University of Applied Sciences in Finland. Through these platforms, he's shared insights and recommendations on how to improve teaching and learning outcomes, foster collaboration and trust, and inspire students and educators alike. His new book, Creating Schools, Where Teachers and Students Want to Be, was released earlier this year. So during this interview, we'll explore more about the book and his views on the future of education. So I hope you enjoy this insightful interview with Michael Lawrence on the podcast today. So welcome to the podcast, finally. It's great to have you on. And when I first came across you, I think it was on Instagram. And I've been following some of your posts and heard about your new book, Creating Schools. And of course, I'm very interested to hear from people who have got new ideas and different ways of and perspectives on education and where it needs to go in the future, or even starting from now, what needs to change. And I'm really interested to learn more about your journeys overseas to explore what's happening in European schools and some of the research that you've done in your book as well, and the broad range of experience that you have over the last 30 years in education. So it's great to have you here. And I always ask my guests to start with where it all started for you. So take us back to the young Michael Lawrence when you were maybe a teenager, thinking about what you wanted to do when you grew up, if you have grown up, in fact.
Um,
We'll pretend that we've grown up, little
uh,
adult bodies, really, aren't we?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm still. I think I'm still 17.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Well, I my education was in Catholic schools, but a year or two in a state primary school when we shifted to a suburb where there clearly wasn't a Catholic school nearby. I guess would have been grade 3 or 4. So and the secondary school was a Catholic secondary school. It was boys only up until year 11 and 12 when it became co-ed. Run by the Brothers of the Sacred Heart, I think they were called. So yeah, pretty traditional stuff there. I can recall my first thought about teaching. I can remember being in one of the classes and something absurd was going on. There were lots of things that used to happen. Like I remember whole class being kept back at about year 8 level by the RE teacher. We were probably had to write out Bible stuff or something like that. But I remember thinking, boy, this is really going to encourage everyone to be religious, isn't it? And I can also recall students who hadn't bought their phys ed gear having to run laps around the oval in their full school uniform, and just lots of really, when you think about it, just really prehistoric stuff like that going on still, because it was only a couple of years earlier in late primary school that I can remember the nuns were still strapping kids with physical punishment. It was like, and the principal's office was next door to the grade 6 classroom that I was in, and every now and then you could hear the wax of the strap on someone's hand, and it was like, wow, it was really. So yeah, that I can remember a few things like that and thinking, if I ever get a chance to be a teacher, I'll make sure that this stuff doesn't happen. I can, you make little silly promises to yourself when you're a little kid. And I
Yeah.
can remember thinking something like that. I must have been about 12 or 13 or something. And I was witnessing one of those things. It might have been staying back writing out RE or something, or kids getting, being embarrassed because they hadn't brought their phys ed uniforms or something like that. But there were lots of things like that were still going on in the school system. That was the earliest thoughts I had about being a teacher, really. Apart from that, I did quite well at school, but I wasn't interested in school. Had no interest in it whatsoever. Matter of fact, by the time I was mid-teens, even before then, early teens, I was mad about music and playing guitar. And so I look across from where I'm sitting, I can see two guitars and a mandolin, and it's still like that here. But that was my world, and it wasn't until I remember getting kicked out of legal studies at year 11 because me and a friend were talking about music, or we should have been talking about legal studies. But
Shame on you. Shame on you for doing that.
but I can remember the English teacher who, much to her credit, had obviously witnessed this, and understood what was going on here. And she was putting together a school newspaper, and she said, "Why don't you write some music reviews?" And suddenly, the world that I lived in and the world of school came together, and it changed my life. The first couple of books I did, the first 3 or 4 books I did were music books. You see.
Yeah.
Um, but and I guess that if you want to talk about a point as a student, apart from all the bad stuff, about the one positive thing was this teacher who'd actually said, "Hey, how about we try and bring the world that this student's in, bring them together with the world of what's going on here at school." And I don't think any teacher had made any attempt to do that. And thinking back, I was probably a pretty intense. I mean, my my family got shaken up completely when my father died unexpectedly when I was 10 years of age. So whole world got overturned completely. And I was the oldest in the family, and my youngest brother was not yet 1 year old. So mum had 3 boys who were, really, really kind of dependent on her completely suddenly. And I think I was just dealing with all that stuff, and school was just this annoying thing. And whilst I passed all right and got good results and so on, because I did like reading and things like that, I liked those things for the sake of those things. School didn't seem to have much time for that though. So it wasn't until this year 11 teacher suggested that I write some music reviews for the school newspaper. And the thing that strikes me as absurd about that now is that VCE now is such a serious thing that no school would ever dream of doing a school newspaper with this, because they're too busy. Oh, we're too busy getting the studying for VCE. But that was more important to me than any of the stuff that I was studying, because, as I said, it suddenly gave me a reason to write, to have something that I liked, that I was interested in, to write about. Whereas prior to that, I had the things they kept getting me to write about were like, well, I don't care about that. So I'd write it off, and, I'd pass it all right. But, I was basically just getting by. And, I kind of reckon that in my experience as a teacher, probably up to 70% of kids on average are probably doing a similar thing.
Yeah.
As educators, we tend to all talk about teachers, about school, and about, we rank students, and we do all this stuff, and we all talk about it as if all the kids, it's like it's a great big reality TV show, and everyone's enlisted in the contest, and they're trying as hard as they can. But in reality, kids aren't. Kids couldn't care less, most of them. You know what I mean? All the teachers are busy grading all their work and ranking them and all that, but the kids are like, they're indifferent to it pretty much.
They don't really want to be there.
Well, no, and it's one of the things that I is one of my common themes is that we couldn't care less about the fact that the kids don't really want to be there.
Mm.
And I just think that's an insult to the students. It's just telling the kids, well, it's just telling them we couldn't care less about you. We're so busy worrying about your education. And it's like, well, no, if you're concerned about their education, you have to be concerned about them and the things that they love and the things that they enjoy, their passions and so on. And I guess this is what probably leading to your next question was the next thing that I became a teacher, of course, and taught for decades. And I taught English, I taught music, history, geography, all those, all the humanities and that kind of thing, as well as, yeah. And I was initially primary trained, but I quickly just found a lot more work. First job I got was in a Catholic secondary school. And so within a few years, I upgraded my qualifications to be able to teach up to VCE. But I didn't teach VCE for long because by the time they were doing that, they were too concerned about standardizing everything. And I wasn't interested in all that kind of thing. So I pulled back from VCE because at the lower levels, I still had some autonomy as a teacher. But it it wasn't until I went to Finland because I'd done these music books. I'd become good friends with a guy who lived in Finland and used to come out to Australia to see some of these bands like Cold Chisel and Midnight Oil, who I wrote books on. He'd come and see these bands, and he'd said to me a few times, "Why don't you come to Finland?" And he said, "I know you're a teacher. I'll take you to some of the schools." Because he's a lecturer in education at one of the universities there, and he said, "Look, I'll take you." And I had zero interest really at that point. As a matter of fact, I'd been getting more and more disillusioned with the education system from a teacher's point of view after decades of doing it. So anyway, this is about 2016, 2017, I went to Finland, and one of the first schools that we visited, my friend took me to a classroom and he said, "Look, sit here and the teacher will be here soon." And so I sat down, and 20 minutes later, the teacher came and opened the door up to the room, and I was astonished to find it was full of students. I thought I'd been sitting there outside an empty classroom because there'd been no noise whatsoever, hardly a sound. And anyway, I said to him, "This is," I said, "I thought I was sitting outside an empty classroom." And the kids were still just working away quietly. They were all about 14 or 15 years of age. And I explained to him. I said, "This couldn't happen in Australia for various reasons." And he just looked at me and he said, "You've had the kids for 10 years at school there, and you can't have them in a room on their own for 20 minutes.
Mm.
What have you been doing?" And I thought, yeah, okay, I'd never thought of it like that. It's so true. It's like we've had kids at school for a decade or more, and yet most of the time, if you walk out of the room for a few minutes, a lot of those kids will, they'll start chatting and doing whatever. And um, you think, yeah, well, what is going on there? How did that work? And that was a turning point for me. And I'd read before I went to Finland. I'd read one Finnish teacher who taught in Australia for a decade. Sorry, for a year. But he described when he went back to Finland. He wrote about his experience in Australia in the professional magazine of the Teachers Association, and he wrote that we were 30 to 40 years behind where they are in Finland, was his estimate. And I wasn't quite sure, but at that moment I started to understand. Okay, I get it now. I can see the thing. We're still desperately trying to get kids to memorize more stuff and to get another mark on this test or that test and so on. And this guy, I actually went for one of the books. I actually found the piece that he'd written, and he'd written about. I actually communicated with him as well, but he'd written about how we'd turned education into this great big contest, and all the kids were pitted against each other, and so were the schools and so on. And what a terrible negative thing this was, and how we were basically destroying the whole educational experience for everybody concerned. And that was a real eye opener. I thought, okay, I got you now. And once I saw that thing where the teacher can walk away from the classroom this would happen constantly. I went back to Finland a number of times after that, Sometimes one time took a group of teachers myself and led them through. But we'd arrive at a school, the teacher would meet us in the foyer, take us around for a tour of the school, and then go back to their classroom where their kids were waiting for them, quietly working away, sometimes as young as grade 3 kids.
Yeah.
And I, you quickly realise that this was nothing unusual, and that they would just think, what is going on in Australia if you can't leave your kids to work in the classroom for half an hour or so? You know, and I just thought, yeah. And I thought, wow, what an incredible thing. And that was when I started to realise that the future of education, and that's what you see when you're in Finland, the future of education isn't finding the latest way to squeeze an extra answer into a kid's mind for a test, answer or something like that, or to get another, extra mark here or an extra mark there. The future of education is creating kids. I often use the analogy, if we're training racehorses, the horse that loves to run is probably nearly always going to beat the horse that's having the whip cracked on it.
Mm.
But the difference is that sometimes the the horse that loves to run, he's just going to run even when there isn't a race on. And
Yeah.
that's what the Finns are doing. They're creating kids who love to learn, and even when they're not at school and even when they're not doing an exam, they still love to learn. And that's what the future of education is.
Yeah.
It's actually not about school and exams and all that kind of thing and cognitive load theory and all this sort of garbage. It's about creating kids who are just learning all the time because they want to. And we'll never beat that. We'll never get a cognitive load theory or a direct instruction method or something that's going to beat kids who are learning because they want to learn. Because you know what I mean? Some of those kids can't wait for the teacher to leave the room so that they can keep learning the stuff that they're enjoying learning.
Mm.
And when I getting back to my original story here, when I said to this teacher in Finland, "What are these kids learning anyway?" Because I wanted to know what they were studying. It was a history class, and he said, "Oh, they're all doing different things. That some of them are doing, Roman fighting techniques or whatever." And I said, "How did that work?" He said, "Oh, I've had a meeting with each one of them, and the idea is that because they're at an age where they may never do history again because it's an elective from this point onwards. We want to make sure that they leave with a love of history and for the rest of their lives, and
Mm.
that way they'll continue to study and learn about history." And I just thought you'd never. That's so much more mature and so far ahead of where we are in Australia, where we'll sacrifice any joy of learning to try and get an extra few marks somewhere, and we'll literally force the kids to rote learn stuff even if they don't want to or whatever, because we just want to get the marks, tick it off and say, there you go. Um, and
It's
so, yeah, that was the real turning point for me, was starting to see that and realizing that so much of what I'd been doing was just wrong. And I could see it as an English teacher that many of the things that I had to teach year 8 and 9 kids in English classes were actually making them dislike English rather than like English. Like, we were so pedantic about having a formula for writing an essay that we didn't care whether the kids had any interest in what they were writing about. And the kids had clearly lost interest in writing as such because the emphasis was so much on the formula. It's a bit like, playing a game with someone. And if you're so pedantic about the rules all the time, eventually a few people are just going to say, look, can't we just enjoy the bloody game? You know what I mean? If someone keeps saying, no, but you've got to do it. That's what I was doing as a teacher. I was pulling kids up all the time about silly little rules and forgetting that writing's supposed to be an enjoyable, creative pursuit.
mm.
It's not supposed to be a chore or a nightmare, but I was actually making kids hate writing, and that was one of the things that, yeah, and you know what I mean. And this is what happened to me anyway. Was I got to Finland, and the more that I moved around schools in Finland and spoke to educators and so on, they'd ask me about things like standardized curriculum, and I'd go, yeah, we were doing that, and they'd go, and I'd just see these sideways looks between a couple of people in the room because they know that that's not good.
Mm.
Standardized curriculum assumes that and they'd say, are all your kids the same? And you'd say, well, no. Well, why would you teach them all the same thing, the same time, the same way? And
Yeah.
you just sort of scratch your head and think, oh, okay, yeah. But they'd got past that decades back, 20 or 30 years ago. So to them, it's like going back. And that's what it's kind of like. It's a bit like, we're moving to electric cars now, but I can remember reading stuff where people were talking about the transition from candles to electric lights and so on. And some people saying, oh, look, a candle works just fine for me. By the time a candle's burnt out, I'm ready for bed anyway. I don't need, these electric lights. We're kind of like that in Australia with education.
Yeah.
And the Finns have gone well behind that, but they see us sitting there going, oh, we're right. By the time my candle's burnt out, I'm ready to go to bed anyway. So don't worry about electric lights. And they're saying, but the electric lights can be turned on and off whenever you want. Oh, I'm all right, really. I want to sleep at night anyway. So I don't, you know what I mean? And that's kind of
Yeah.
what I see Australia like now, where everyone's got these excuses
Mm.
for why we keep doing things the old way, and we just sit on them, and it suits. And lots of schools are making lots of money, just like lots of candle makers were probably making a lot of money out of candles back in the day, and so on back then. And we just and to be honest with you, most Australian, and I was in the same boat. I didn't know what else existed. I didn't understand that there were other ways of doing things that were better. I knew that I was, as I said, making kids dislike English, but I suppose I just thought, well, I guess this is the best thing we can do, isn't it? And I
Yeah.
accepted and trusted that the authorities and so on that were telling me to do this stuff.
Yeah.
But I guess I trusted that they were sincere, and I started to realise that they weren't at all.
Mm.
That they weren't doing that, and through things like Parsi Salberg writes about how for decades back in about the early about 15 years ago, Australia was being invited to the International Summit on the Teaching Profession and so on, and just saying, no, we're not going. And Australia didn't attend it for 15 years, while the rest of the countries, most of the rest of the world's countries went there, and they talked about the teacher shortages, they talked about teacher education and all these things. Australia never attended any of those meetings. And then we end up with this top-down system here, the way we run the system, where they're more concerned about monitoring what all the schools are doing and insisting that they all do the same thing, because that's the easiest way to run a top-down system.
Yes.
If people are doing different things, and if you don't trust that system and you don't trust teachers, and look, I suspect that it's probably more conservative sides of government that have not trusted. You often hear them talking about how teachers are out there, brainwashing kids and things like that. You hear all these things, but I think a principal, I had communicated this on LinkedIn a couple of weeks back, and he basically said that he was a principal in Victoria. He's now retired, but he said he would go to these meetings with the statewide conference and things like that. And the deputy secretary, he said, had a slide with the word innovation on it, and it had a red line through it. And he said it made it very clear, conform or else, and that's the kind of thing that kept Australian education back by
Yes.
30 or 40 years.
So we're
Is
in fact going backwards because it's happening in the Catholic system now in Victoria as well, where
Yeah, yeah,
a
yeah.
consistent approach across all.
Yeah, exactly. And it's easier to control. It's like, as a teacher, it's easier if I have everyone doing the same thing. It's easier for me.
Yeah.
Doesn't suit the kids one little bit, but it's easier for me to do that. But Finnish teachers are so
A sausage
yeah,
fact.
Finnish teachers are so much better than that. They're so much more skilled, and I think Australian teachers are too. Um, but yeah, that's sort of the essence of where we got to. There's a great a bit of information that the OECD put out in 2023 it's basically a graph on the length of instruction that Australian kids get compared to kids in the rest of the world. And by the time our kids have finished year nine, they've spent more than double, nearly double, sorry, what Finnish and Estonian kids have spent in the classroom, and yet our results are worse.
Well, they're stuck inside a classroom, aren't they? Children are not
Well,
meant to be stuck
well,
in.
yeah, and we have this idea that more, but it shows that our idea that more classroom time is better
Mm.
just doesn't work.
No,
And you know,
that learning doesn't just happen at school. Learning is happening everywhere.
well, the you often hear them say the Finnish don't kids teachers don't assign homework, but for the reasons I mentioned before, Finnish kids are often doing schoolwork at home because it's their schoolwork, and why wouldn't they want to do it at home?
Learning at home is such an important aspect of their learning. It doesn't have to be homework. It could,
Well, it's not. Well, how can I put it? It's not prescribed by the teacher to them, but the teacher can't stop them from doing it.
yeah.
And that's the difference. Basically, Finland are creating kids that love learning. And it's one, as one teacher said to me, he said, "Oh, I spend the first 3 or 4 days playing games and making sure that the kids like school because I don't want to start trying to do any lessons until I know that they're enjoying school." And they understand that. And the neuroscience tells us that you learn so much more when you're enjoying something.
Yeah,
You
and also
know, you,
playing games, when you're learning through play, you're developing your cognitive skills, your brain connections that help with other learning as well.
well, the Finns have really by not starting school till kids are 7 years of age, they've those previous couple of years they've been in childcare or equivalent, and there's been a huge accent on play. So that kind of thing is really kind of taken care of. But also this whole thing when the kids are walking to school and so on, they're learning the same skills that they learn in play as well, that they don't learn when mum's holding their hand or dad's driving them down the road to school. So that's kind of all happening. And we went one, one of the one of the days, and the last time I visited was there, which was not last year, the year before. There was a snowstorm on the first day that, and we I got caught. I had runners and stuff. I wasn't as an Australian. I wasn't prepared for it. But we got to this junior school anyway, and all these 7-year-olds are all there walking to school on their own in the snowstorm
Mm.
because they've been trained to. They've been told that's what, and the parents have been told, make sure you don't go babying your kids and so on. So it's just understood that it's for the best thing for the kids to learn. But this is another reason why you can leave them in a classroom on their own because they're not being supervised all the time. They've been trained to take responsibility and act responsibly. And this is why our kids, when we leave them in a classroom unsupervised, they can't control themselves because we don't leave them for a minute unsupervised at any point during the whole bloody day, do we?
Well, and I want to ask you about that because I want to take you back to when you were a child. And
Yep.
it's amazing how the guests that I have on, I have a lot in common with each of them. And I guess your experience of losing your father at a young age and being one of, was it three boys? One of three boys
Yep.
with a
Yep.
single parent. I had not the same experience, but a similar experience when my father left and my mum was a single parent as well. And back then, when we were at school, we didn't really have anyone to turn to talk about these things that are happening in our home life to be able to support us to get through the trauma that comes from those experiences.
I don't think school counsellors existed then.
No, not at all. And no one even
Hmm.
really talked about what actually happened. You just had to deal
Yep.
with it as a kid. And
Yep.
obviously that builds resilience and, it it shapes the person that you are because you become a person that is self-sufficient and able to manage in when, things do go wrong in your life or you have challenges. But it's a harsh way to learn. It's a very harsh um, upbringing, I suppose, when that sort of thing happens and you have to deal with it as a kid. And now we're seeing a lot of children who are experiencing, similar traumas where there's a lot of marriage breakdowns, there's a lot of challenges in the home environment that are preventing children, I guess, from being nurtured or, I guess, uh, able to be, enabled to cope with different things that are happening in their lives. And that's sort of flowing into their lives at school. And there's a lot of challenges around children with diverse learning needs. And we're seeing that probably more now because of what you were saying before, how that's not a one size fits all approach, and that top down approach of teaching everyone the same thing is not working for our kids because we are all different. We all learn differently. We're all going through different experiences and we have different passions, different interests. And as adults, we are able to explore that. Um, so I guess my question is, with your example of Finland and the way that they've raised children to be more autonomous and independent learners, how is that different in their country compared to ours, where we are seeing a lot of children who are presenting as neurodiverse and coming from traumatic upbringings or traumatic backgrounds?
Look, I think one these kind of things are a lot easier for the Finnish system to deal with because they know that standardized curriculum is not a good thing at all. So they're not trying to make these kids fit the same hole like we do
Yeah.
with it. So if a kid's got an interest I remember telling, I often tell the story of a student I had a few years back called Max, who first day I walked into class, he said, "G'day, Mr. Lawrence. I'm no good at English. I hate it." And he was probably dyslexic or something. Who knows? But there's often something like that there when a kid knows and will tell you out front that he's terrible at. But how I connected with him, I found he was mad about fishing. And so each Monday I'd come in and say, "How'd you go on the weekend?" And he'd describe the tides and the different types of fish and all and I thought if I could get him to write me a piece about how to catch a fish in Port Phillip Bay, probably write really well, but I had to teach him Romeo and Juliet or something. And at this point, he hadn't even noticed a girl, let alone understood all of the emotions and let alone the language that was going on, et cetera, et cetera. And could you see how having to teach him that was probably increasing his feelings of I'm no good at English, I hate it.
Yeah.
Um, in Finland, the teacher would have probably got him to write about how to catch a fish in Port Phillip Bay. And he'd have probably done a pretty good job on it because he loves fishing and he would be concerned that he wrote it well and accurately and so on. And it would mean something to him. And a lot of people, and he'd have probably, in Finland, they'd have probably been doing that since they were 7 years of age, which is when they started school, not 5. Don't get me started on kids at 5-year-old being at school. I just don't see the need for that. But anyway, he'd probably never decided that he was terrible at English and hated it because he'd have been able to write about things that he cared about, and he'd have probably got good feedback on those things as well. And for quite a few years thought, I'm, not bad at English. I'm doing all right. And by the time he got to year 8 or 9, he'd have probably been up to the challenge of writing about something like Shakespeare or whatever, because he'd have had some confidence developed in English.
Yeah.
But in our system, we basically tell him, well, I don't care if what you're interested in, you're going to do this.
Mm.
I'm not interested in your fishing stuff. Shut up and listen and do what we're doing. The way we're doing it. Everyone else is doing it. You do it.
Yeah.
And that's the end of the story. And we wonder why the kids are pushing back and misbehaving, and why when the teacher leaves the room, the kids might misbehave and start talking or being distracted.
Mm. Whereas
Because
if
what
they're
I also started to realise in Finland was that what are the kids going to rebel against?
yeah.
You know what I mean? Because they've had a say in the work. They've got ownership of the work. There's not a kid wearing a uniform. The Finns will say, they look at you funny when you talk about uniforms, and they smile because to them it's like a military thing.
Mm.
Um, and they think it's funny that we do military stuff in schools, but they also was are quite open to if you've got neuroscience that tells you what color socks they're wearing improves their learning. We'll look into it. They're quite, they're not, you know what I mean? They're not being silly about it,
Yeah.
but you quickly realize how silly we are,
Mm.
that we're more concerned, and we are more concerned with the uniform than the learning, because we will send the kid home
Yes.
rather than tell them to keep going when they're not wearing the uniform.
Yeah, there's
And
no,
this is why our kids rebel at school.
it's like when children go to school, they're unique little individuals when before they go to school. And then once they're at school, they must conform. So they no longer know who they are, really. They start
Yeah,
to not know who they're supposed to be, who they are, what their interests are, unless they have parents who encourage their interests, which is what I'm passionate about, parent engagement, because when you stay with your kids on that journey through school, you can foster and nurture those passions at home that aren't being nurtured at school. And it's sad that it has to be like that if school is not allowing or enabling. And I don't think that it's all schools who don't allow or enable children's passions to come through. I think my own experience with my children in primary school was fantastic because they did a lot of project-based learning where they were able to choose topics they were interested in to do with maths, to do with science, and working on projects to learn all the different skills that they needed to create an idea, come up with an idea, and then see it to fruition. So I think there has been a lot of changes in terms of how they're teaching children to become autonomous learners and individuals. However, I am also seeing that that's going backwards in a lot of ways because it's about controlling the learning and controlling the way teachers teach and not giving teachers autonomy, which means they're losing interest in teaching, which we're now seeing they're leaving the profession. So what
well,
is
that was my experience, and my co-author of the Creating Schools book, Fab de Gostin, he's got a PhD in mathematics education, but he was still had schools trying to micromanage him.
Yeah.
Like, this guy's got a PhD. What the hell, you know? When is the teacher
The
got
maths.
enough knowledge that you? Because in Finland, it's considered disrespectful to interfere with what a teacher does in the classroom.
Yeah.
So principals and so on do not interfere with what the teacher does in the classroom. They clear the way and make it possible for the teacher to do their stuff in the classroom, but they would not dream. And they don't. And it's the same with the. This goes as far as curriculum. The curriculum is up in the cloud. The
Mm.
government's, that's where it's stored from the government.
That's
The
where it all
teacher,
starts.
yeah, the teacher accesses that, interprets it, and does what they will for what they think is appropriate for their students.
Mm.
And this is why they sort of give you these sideways looks when you talk about standardized curriculum, because teachers may do a project together or something, but they would certainly it's not considered appropriate for someone to be telling a teacher what they have to do, because that's like no one, it's like going somewhere. Imagine going to your local doctor's surgery and going in and telling the doctor, look, if every patient that comes in with the flu, you've got to do this, and this. Because they'll say, well, no, some of my patients are 12 years old and some of them are 84. Some of them I've never seen before, and some of them I've got pages of history on.
Yeah.
I'm going to treat each patient based on what I see and my knowledge of them, and so on. And that's how education is seen in Finland. And that's why they wouldn't dream of applying the same stuff to every student in a class.
Mm.
But we don't think twice about that. We see that as professional. And I've seen schools who think they're more professional because they've got more standardization right through the whole bloody school.
Mm.
And you just shake your head and think, oh God, you've gone back 50 years instead of 20 or 30 years.
Yeah.
But and I remember talking to a principal not that long ago. They, the hit stuff on the education department website, the high impact teaching strategies. He'd been doing. Now, when I looked at that, I thought this looks to me like it could be a suggestion for a class, perhaps at VCE level, second half of the year. In other words, remove all non-extra stuff that's not going to be on the exam and all that. Some schools are doing it through the whole school right down to year seven. And you think there's nowhere where it says that's suitable for a whole school or whatever. But some schools have done that. And I was talking to a principal of a school who'd done that. And I said, have you had any success with that? And he said, well, no, not really. I said, are you aware of any other schools that have? No. And you just feel like, but that's the story of Australian education.
Mm.
Because the Finns would say, so why are you still doing it?
Yeah, if it's not working, why are you still doing it?
And, I didn't, and I remember being asked that about NAPLAN. Because and trying to explain that plan to someone overseas, they don't do that. They do some testing, but it's just small samples from each school, and it's more about finding out about the suitability of the curriculum than it is about testing the kids, if you know what I mean. Whereas we never see it that way. We only see it as about kids. But anyway, they said to me, "Oh, okay, so NAPLAN, so it identifies schools and students who aren't going so well, so that they can give extra help and funding to them." And it's like you have to say, no, no, that would be logical, wouldn't it? But no, who said that we apply logic here?
Yeah, but the funding has increased. So I saw a graph actually that Pasi Sahlberg presented at a meeting I was in with him a couple of years ago, and it indicated that spending on education has increased, but student well-being and learning has decreased. So it doesn't matter how much money they pump into schools and education, whatever the money is being spent on is clearly not working because we're not
Well,
thinking about the
the,
individual
we're,
student.
we're not interested in how the students feel, which is what well-being and all that's about.
There are some schools that do, but
Well,
and
I
it's
don't see a lot of it. I can tell you, I don't see a lot of it. I see schools that have counsellors down the corridor,
mm,
but they won't. I don't see schools that are saying, "Yeah, don't think this class should do that plan."
yeah. Well, I think it seems
And you
like
know what I mean? And that's caring about kids when you say, "No, we won't do that plan
yeah.
because it's too much, too stressful for our students." Because one Finnish teacher said to me, they said, "Why are you letting kids as young as 8 year old do nap plan when you know that that's not good for them?
It's
You're responsible for their well-being." And they literally pointed a finger at me like I was,
I
some
raised
sort of
that
bloody.
question at a meeting I was sitting in with VCAR a few years ago. I said to them, why is it that NAPLAN is provided to students when they are in the year levels that are the most critical and pivotal year levels of their young life? So grade three is a turning point. So age seven, every 7 years pretty much. Grade three is a turning point in a child's education. Learning becomes more difficult because I'm seeing a lot of young people at that age who are struggling with literacy and maths. And year seven, huge turning point in a child's life who's just come from primary school to secondary school. Year nine, which we know has always been a challenging year as well, and of course year five, so where they're just about to hit puberty. I said, what year level? Who chose those year levels when they are the most challenging, probably, of a young child's life? And they said, well, what year level would you choose? And I said, well, probably wouldn't choose any year level to be honest, but if it had to be, I don't know. There's probably no clear answer. Maybe grade four. I don't know.
I cannot find. I've never had anybody give me a good answer to the question of what is the purpose of NAPLAN.
Well, it's for the finances, isn't it, from the government, where they're going to allocate their budget. And some
But
schools the
But in
data.
that case, they'd be giving the extra money to the schools that perform badly, and they don't. It's
Yeah,
almost the opposite.
yeah. Um, I want to take you back to the discussion about teachers because um, several years ago I was at a conference where we had Dr. What's his name? Yong Zhao. I think that's his name.
Hmm.
He was talking about creativity in education, and he goes around the world talking about this topic. And um, we were having a panel discussion on the stage, and one of the education leaders was on the panel, and a teacher stood up in the audience and asked the question, what happens if my school principal or my school leader doesn't allow me to be creative as a teacher? And the education leader that was on the panel was mortified and said to this teacher, well, you give me the name of your school leader, and I'll have a very stern conversation with that person about not allowing the staff to be creative. So I think that there are a lot of perhaps leaders in schools still who are not enabling their staff to be creative and innovative. But I've worked with some leaders who have been like that, and they've allowed their teachers to come up with ideas, new ways of teaching, new ways of creating their classroom culture, and, focusing on well-being as well. But, I guess it's not, even with school leadership, it's not a one size fits all approach. And how are they actually being trained as leaders in schools? Is that coming from the top down as well? How is this actually going to change if it doesn't start with leadership? How is it actually going to change? And how are we going to retain teach good quality teachers to be able to teach the way we want them to teach?
Unfortunately, I think an enormous number of our best teachers have already walked away because the really creative ones. I mean, the problem with creativity is it's the total opposite of the high impact teaching strategies we were just talking about,
Mm,
isn't it?
yeah,
You, and while that's up on the department's website with very little direction or extra information as to how to implement it, it's being interpreted as a model for everyone to follow. So there it is up there saying, don't be creative, don't worry, don't do anything that's not on the test.
yeah.
And certainly don't worry about whether the kids are interested in it, which
And,
is what creativity is all about, really, isn't it?
and it's sold to teachers as this will save you time on planning lessons.
Don't get me going down that road. The goal, well, what's going on there is that particularly in New South Wales, someone's decided that one of the best ways to fix up the teacher shortage is to actually dumb down the teaching profession to a point where anybody who can read a script can be our teacher, and we'll just put the best practices that there are on the script, and that way they're getting the absolute best. And I'm speaking for anyway. Yeah, we're getting they're getting they think that they're doing favors to people there or whatever, but in fact they're just dumbing down teaching completely. And I if things continue to go that way, our poorest kids are going to get poorer real fast.
Mm,
The kids in the top private schools will continue to get good teachers, and some of them may even improve their practices. Who knows? But the point is that the ones that don't have access to that are going to go backwards faster and faster and faster, and
mm,
the rich will get richer and the poor will get the picture, as they say. And because those are the schools that will suffer. Already we have a NAP plan where it says if your kid's at a school that doesn't go well on NAP plan, send them to a school that does do well at NAP plan.
really?
Yeah, that's what it says on the My School's website. Tells them, and they do. And if your parents are wealthy enough and have got time, they can drive you to a school that's a little further away. and or a private school, they can spend money on that, and you'll be fine. But the kids who don't have those options, they're the ones who will suffer.
Mm.
And your education system is only as good as those. But many in Australia don't believe that. Many in Australia believe that we can provide a good education to an exclusive few, and that's enough.
Yeah.
And that's where we stand, I think. While you've got a lot of people who are content with that and think that's all right, you're going to have a real difficulty trying to get proper education or better education to those kids who don't have those opportunities in front of them, the single parent family kids and so on. And, perhaps people like us are prejudiced because of our backgrounds, but um,
No, I think it's an interesting situation that we have in Australia where we have three sectors, the Catholic, the public, and
yeah.
government and the private. And I think that I don't see a problem with that because it gives people choice. And I think that in a democracy, we should have a choice of where we send our children. And there's always going to be people who can afford uh, an education and people who can't afford to send them to a private education.
But
However,
that's not choice, is it?
well, it is,
Only some people have the choice.
no, but everyone has a choice in life. And
Yeah, but you're starting to sound like a right wing bloody extremist now.
no,
You
not at
you
all.
you got to you next. You'll be telling those people whose parents left, who are in one. You'll be telling my mum when I was 10 years old that she should have worked harder,
No,
or
no,
your mum after dad had left that your mum should have worked harder or something.
not suggesting that. What I'm getting at is if we have an education system that is across the board, like some countries do have, isn't there always the danger that there is going to be less autonomy in an across the board education system anyway? No
Why
variety.
would that? Why would that be?
Well,
Seems to work fine in Estonia and Finland.
if it's top down from the government, how much control does the government have in those countries of the education system? And what
Education's not considered a political football in those countries.
so that's the
The
difference.
government has very little. In Finland, the government does not interfere with education. It's a bipartisan agreement that they want a good education system and they leave educators to.
So that's the point I was trying to get across is what needs to change in our system for this to change because it's
Yeah, it's
not going to come
yeah,
from
it's tricky. Yeah,
ourselves.
and you know what? It took Finland a few years to get rid of all their private schools too.
Yeah,
It didn't just happen overnight. They had to basically give them a notice that were going to, they were going to basically have to either change to government schools or close down.
yeah,
But it was done successfully, and I don't think that we need to do that. But I think that we need to get out of. I often go to the work at. I've worked at a lot of these private schools, and I just think you guys could be doing what Finland's doing tomorrow.
yeah. But a lot
You
of
know,
a lot of our schools is based on the British system that was brought here so many years ago, and it's very steeped in tradition, and that tradition is very embedded in the culture of our schools. So to change that culture in schools, it really probably needs to start with the student voice, which is probably what is actually happening. There's a lot of students who are sharing their voices a lot more now. But I want to touch on the system that they have in the US as well, the charter school system.
yeah.
There are charter schools that are created, and a lot of them are actually very based on creativity. I happened to go to one in Taos in New Mexico a few
Mm.
years ago, and it was in a very remote area of the country. And a lot of the kids the model that they were using back in 2014, this was more a facilitation model where the teachers were like facilitators and they were mentors. And each student had their own learning plan and they knew exactly what they needed to do. They were all working independently and they were held accountable not just by their mentor but by themselves. So they knew they had set goals that they needed to reach. And some of the students were only on site for maybe 2 or 3 days a week, and then they would work from home. So they were already working from home before COVID hit. So that sort of model was very, well, at the time, I thought, oh, that's pretty a unique model that could work in Australia, especially in our remote areas and regional areas where kids have got a learning plan and they can actually work from home. Um, so I think that it just takes it's going to take a lot of out of the box thinking in our system to move away from those really embedded traditional models of schooling where everyone needs to be controlled to, like you say, giving students more autonomy and giving them their own learning experience. And that's what it comes down to, I think, is what experience are we giving children when they're learning? It is about the experience. Otherwise, it is just a robotic system where they're all prescripted, the same type of learning, and they're not necessarily enabled to be creative and to be unique individuals. I think it is starting to change, but yeah, there's a long way to go.
Mm, definitely. Definitely. Was that a question?
Yeah, well, what are your thoughts on that? The charter system and the government giving opportunities for people like yourself and people who have got ideas around how education can be improved. Because there's another story I can share, which is a principal shared with me that a friend of hers wanted to start a school for autistic children and gifted children and put all the applications in, and it was all knocked back. Had all the research, all the backing, all the evidence that was needed to be able to open this school, but it was knocked back. So there's resistance,
Oh
from
yeah.
from
There's
authority.
there's there are schools like the Croydon Community School. I don't know if you've heard of that, but Bronwyn Harcourt's principal out there. But I visited that school a year or two back, and it was just like being in Finland.
Yeah,
It's a high school, a government high school. But that said, you walk around and the kids are all dressed in casual clothes. They're all doing their work. It's like walking around a workplace, basically. Everyone's working away. They're all polite, nice. Lots of her students have been expelled from other schools.
hmm.
Yeah, they're not the cream of the crop, or anything like that. And they were the second biggest improver in that plan the year before I visited in the state. But she said she goes to the regional meetings and they pretty much ignore her.
Yeah,
And she's getting better results than most of the other schools at those regional meetings. But because she doesn't follow the compliance model that everyone else has got, they make it difficult for her. And there's a school called the Ide Academy in Perth. I don't know if you've heard of that one, but it's right in the middle of Perth. But two ladies started that a couple of years back, and they were a government school as well. And the government sent someone who sat in the middle of their building for 6 weeks, noting everything they did and so on, and just basically put so many hurdles in front of them and made it so hard for them that they eventually became independent of the government.
mm,
And I visited at the end of last year, and she said, "No, no problems now. They couldn't care less about what we do, but we don't get any funding from the government."
yeah. So it has to
And
be
it's like the
right.
same thing. It's like being in Finland. It's the kids are all doing their own, their intrinsic motivation. They're all working on their stuff really well. It's like walking through an office. Everyone's at their desks doing their stuff. It's not set up like a school. It's set up like an office block kind of thing. It's right in the middle of the city. It's underground, in fact, and so on. It hasn't got a playground The kids just go out in the street for, but they're like 15 and above. I think they're not any younger than that.
Yeah.
So she's doing them from year 10 onwards, basically, to get them into university and things like that, different colleges and so on. But doing it with great success. But the government just made it so impossible for them to do it when they tried to do it as a government school.
Yeah.
So
And this,
that's what happens in Australia,
mm,
and I find that unacceptable because, and I've had a few people say to someone said a few weeks back to Fab and I, they said, "Why don't you guys start a school?" I said, "No, no, I don't want to start a school. The whole bloody country's got to be fixed up. One school isn't enough. You know what I mean? There's no point
one
given
school at a time though might make a difference.
it what."
One school at a time might make a difference.
I haven't got enough years left on this planet to do it that way.
Yeah.
It's like someone said to me when I first started working. The first book I did was testing 321, what Australian education can learn from Finland back in 2019, 2020. It came out. But someone said to me, "Why don't you do a PhD on this?" And I was like, "Are you insane? This
Writing,
has got to change.
doing a
This
PhD.
has got to change right now." I said, this country hasn't got time for me to go swanning around doing a PhD before I eventually announce my findings. At that point, no one had heard of the teacher shortage or anything. This was like 2018 or something when I first went to Finland. No
Yeah.
one knew what I was talking about. But it's all happened now. But at least I wasn't swanning around doing a bloody PhD so that it might look good by my name. They were saying, "Oh, well, it gives you." It's like Fab, my co-writer's got a PhD. It doesn't change anything. They're not interested. We've got to get the powers that be, we've got to get the leaders out there and so on to say, and this is what you get in Finland.
Mm.
They do what's best for students. Every educator has sworn an oath to do what's best for students, not for government, not for religion, and because there's no private schools, they don't have to worry about any of that kind of stuff. They're sworn, like the medical oath you swear when you go into the medical profession.
Mm.
That's what educators have sworn in Finland, and that's why they will only do. They won't. They looked at me and said, "Why are you letting kids do that plan?
Yeah.
You should be And I remember telling you it was embarrassing because they're saying, pointing the finger at me like that, saying, "Why aren't you looking after their well-being and saying no, they're not going to do it." And
Yeah.
that's what Australian educators have to do, though. We've got to put a foot down and say no more. It's got to stop. We've got to put students first and stop hurting them and destroying lives and so on. I was in talking about the NAPLAN thing. I was my last class at the school the Catholic school I was last teaching full time at. We were talking about the whole fixed mindset stuff and growth mindset. We're having a discussion about that.
Yeah.
And one girl put her hand up and she said to me, "I can remember the time I realised that I was terrible at maths." And I said, "Oh, okay, well, tell us about that." She said, "It was during the grade 3 NAPLAN test." She
Mm.
said, "There were all these questions I didn't know, and I didn't want to disappoint the teacher and my parents and stuff. So I decided then that I wouldn't do it anymore." And she's now like 14 or something. She's probably 20 now, but she was 14 at the time in year 8. And she'd basically decided that she would no longer put herself in a position of having to let down anybody by having any expectation of her doing maths.
Mm.
So she was pushing maths aside as much as she could, avoiding it. And as she finished saying it, a few other girls were nodding as well. And I said, "What are you nodding for?" And they said, "I did the same thing." And there were 4, and these were the really good girls. They weren't the rebels. They were the ones that want to please the adults. And that was when I started to understand what the Finnish teachers meant when they said, "Why are you letting these grade 3 students do that kind of test? It's a high pressure test. And if they can't do it, they decide that they're failures and they make decisions that change their lives as they sit there in that room. And we're not aware of that. We don't, as teachers, we should be saying to them, if you can't do any of these questions, don't worry, it's not a problem. We have to read a script. The NAPLAN script you have to read. It doesn't read like that, does it? It doesn't say, don't worry if you can't do any of this. Don't let it bother you. It's not reassuring at all. And that's what the Finnish experts were getting at, because the Finnish teachers, they understand how all this works and so on. We're still back there damaging kids and wondering why kids don't like school and wondering why kids are all going to see counsellors because they've got mental health problems and so on, and saying, I don't know why. We're using direct instruction in the classroom.
Yeah,
And you know what I mean? It's like Fab, my co-writer, his PhD's on emotions in education.
yeah,
And his findings for all his research were that when the kids are enjoying what they're learning, they also do really well on the testing of it and things like that. When they're not enjoying it, they don't.
yeah. Well,
And
like,
how do we inform our teaching with that? We don't at all. We don't care.
mm,
Kids can be upset and crying, and no one says, I wonder what we could change to make sure they're not upset and crying. We don't do that. We take them out, send them to a counsellor and bring them back. But we never actually look at what is it we're doing that is upsetting them. What is it we're doing that's meaning that more and more of them are going to counsellors than ever before?
so nothing's changed since you and I were in school because, yeah, you were talking about kids being forced to write lines and having the strap and all that sort of thing.
But you know what? It
Different.
wasn't as competitive then as it is now, and it wasn't as standardised as it is then now either, I don't think. So we've actually gotten the whole standardisation thing is zeroed in more and more and more. And then we wonder why the kids are getting more and more mental health issues and are rebelling more and not liking school more. And we're creating that problem. The system that we have creates that problem. At the very age when they're trying to find who they are as individuals, we are shutting down all their options and all their ways of thinking and looking at things and so on. And then wondering why are they not coping well with that?
Yeah. So,
And that was my response. I came back from Finland angry, mad, as I saw kids in my classes that were telling me that they'd decided they were no good at maths because of NAPLAN. That it's changed their lives
yeah.
completely. The rest of their lives will never be the same again. None of them are ever going to be accountants or anything like that, are they?
No. Well, I had a bad experience with a nun in grade four who told me I was terrible at maths, and I had that embedded in my brain for
Yeah.
a lifetime, basically.
That's horrible, isn't it? But
But it,
this is what our system does. I can remember getting mad as a year eight teacher as we ranked every kid from 1 to 225 on a wall. You know those walls where they. One of my sons was one of those kids. Now he was near the top, but I still felt sick in the stomach about the whole thing. And when I tried to find out why we were doing it, what the purpose was, no one could tell me.
mm,
And
yeah,
I just find that really, really nauseating. It's like, and the Finns just look at you and say, why would you be doing that why are you even being competitive with year seven and year eight kids? They're still 4 or 5 years off before they do any exams that mean anything. And they're right. They are. They're still 4 or 5 years off before they do any. Why are we bothering with that?
mm,
You know what I mean? And this is why I get so annoyed and so angry about it, because kids should be enjoying school. It should be wonderful. If we're not creating a love of learning, we're doing it wrong. Nothing else matters.
yeah,
Nothing else matters. If they like the learning, the marks and grades look after themselves.
yeah.
And
And
have you ever known a kid that didn't love school and didn't also do well at it?
I think a lot of it comes back to, yeah, the teachers and how they do make lessons interesting and engaging, because that has a lot to do with, the personality of teachers, and, dumbing down teaching is not the answer because
Yeah, definitely not. No. I
we
mean, I
can't.
wanted to make I wanted to make my English classes as exciting as I could, but I still had to teach stuff that I knew was making kids hate it. And if I did one thing different, they'd try and micromanage me and say, "Oh no,
Mm,
you got to do this and that. You can't do this. You can't do it that way. You got to give exactly the same assignment as all the other classes are doing." And you know why I had to do that? So that we could rank and compare them with the kids in the other classes.
yeah, yeah.
And then I said, so the marks are more important than the kids.
Mm.
And they don't like hearing that.
And the competition.
Yeah, they don't like hearing that because they'll all tell you they're child-centered.
Mm, yeah,
And this is where what we are just making it up as we go along. We like to say these things, but we're not really child-centered. The Finns are truly child-centered. If the kids don't like it, oh, let's change it so they like it because we don't want to put them off maths, do we?
yeah. There'd be a
You
lot of
never hear that here.
if you give kids too much autonomy, that that control is lost. What would you say to people who disagree with that as an option, as a way of uh,
Well, once again, if you've got to, I was really impressed with the things like the kids that were catching the trams to school at 7 years of age and stuff, because I know that I've been teaching long enough to have seen too many students who've died at 18 or 19 years of age in car crashes in places where they shouldn't have been, and they shouldn't have been travelling at that speed at that time. And you know that we did nothing to prepare them for making choices about risks and so on because we wouldn't let them walk down the street on their own.
mm,
And suddenly they were 18 and they had a car that could go at 150 kilometres an hour. They had alcohol. They had God knows what else, legal and illegal. But we'd done nothing to prepare them for that part of their life because we just controlled every little thing they did. And I saw a few former students who I heard about that died in crashes like that. And you know what? They were just doing it because they could suddenly. And we haven't done anything to help those kids at all, have we? And you know what? Eventually, we can't keep putting compliance rules on them and so on. We can't keep controlling everything they do. Eventually, they're out there in the world and they can do whatever they want. And
yeah,
that's what we've got to prepare them for.
the whole schoolies phenomenon has or
Yep.
intrigued me over the last few years,
Yep.
where it's like children, young people have been let out of prison almost, and they just go wild because, well, finally they're free.
Yep.
It shouldn't be that.
Yep.
It shouldn't be, you get to that end point and all of a sudden, oh my gosh, I can just do whatever I want. I have my freedom again. And then they go crazy and, drive fast and try drugs and alcohol and things if they don't have the right guidance, of course. But yeah, it shouldn't be that way. We want kids to be able to uh, love, yeah, like you say, love learning and love being with their classmates, with their friends, and make school an enjoyable experience. So, one of my final questions for you is where do we actually start? Like from day one tomorrow, what would you say is the best place that we need to start? You mentioned lobbying the government and um,
If I was running a school, and we've been doing a lot of talks lately to school leaders and teachers and so on, I'd be saying encourage all the parents at your school to let their kids walk to school, or if you must drive them because of the distance, drop them off a couple of blocks away, uh, and give them, because the way to train kids to take responsibility is to give them responsibility. We tend to think we give them a million rules and they're responsible. But, China's got lots of responsible citizens too, but doesn't mean it's a society that we all want to strive to be like, does it?
yeah.
That's how we run our schools, though, and we think that oh yes, it's a great thing. Um, when I walked into classrooms in Finland where there was no teacher and the kids were all working, they weren't working because they were scared. There's no fear involved. There's been no threats. Here, you guys do your work or whatever. It's not like that. But that's kind of how we work it. And if you think about it, if I'm threatening you to do something, saying, and I'm saying to you, Rachel, do this, or I'll whack you, or whatever, or I'll punish you in some way, you're probably not going to be enthusiastic about the thing that I'm trying to get you to do, are you?
Mm.
And we never view that. We never see that's what we do to kids, though. We put threats on them to do work, to behave themselves, or whatever. And the Finns have gone way beyond all that stuff, and they've taken it to a different level. And kids aren't behaving themselves because they're scared that they'll get punished. They're not doing their work because they're worried that there'll be consequences if they don't.
Mm.
They're doing these things because it's the right thing to do. They like it, in fact. They want to do it.
Is one of the challenges that our teachers are not necessarily trained to understand human behavior as well and humans themselves.
One thing you do notice in Finland is that because teachers have complete autonomy, it's a highly desirable profession. When they've done surveys of young people in Finland, teaching comes up there with medicine as the highest, most desirable profession. When you apply to get into education, 1 in 6 don't get in. Sorry, only 1 in 6 do get in. My mistake. It used to be only 1 in 10 got in a
Yeah.
decade or more ago. So those that do get in are the ones who've got 90 whatever on the equivalent of 90 whatever on their ATAR scores, but they often have to have an interview or sometimes even an audition to get into teaching.
Right person for the job.
Exactly, and when you meet these teachers, they're really smart people. Like I probably wouldn't have been smart enough to be a teacher. Simple as that, and I accept that. That's fine. In If the system was that good, I'd be happy to not be a teacher. I don't need to be in it. It's not about me.
Mm.
And a lot of teachers, have to. But the point is we're nowhere near that. We're at the point where it's almost impossible for you not get into teaching here.
Yeah.
And that's really, really sad for our kids. Think of what it does to young people when the person who spends the most time in a room with them when they're young is one of the smartest people in the country.
Mm.
That's a really inspiring thing. And this is for all the things I'm talking about, how they raise it all to another level and so on. That's the key to it is when you've got these really smart people, the kids see them and they go, yeah, yeah. They want to be like them. They see that these are really smart people and they're really good people too. I was like, every teacher I met, I was just like, what a great person. They all blew me away as being, you don't always get that in Australia, unfortunately, because we have no bar. The bar hasn't been lowered because the bar just doesn't exist here.
Yeah.
And that's the sad thing, there's so many great teachers. And I always say any teacher who's teaching successfully in our system is an absolute genius because the system is really making it hard for them too.
And I
Um,
believe that teachers need to have a certain higher intelligence and emotional intelligence as well.
well, that's what you're getting in Finland, definitely. Yeah, and I'd never thought about it too. I never look before I went to Finland. I had no idea that education could work the way that it does over there. So it was a steep learning curve for me, and I still want to go. I've been there 3 times. I was supposed to go back earlier this year, but my mother got very sick, and I wasn't able to go. But
Yeah.
we thought we were going to lose her. But I will get back there again because there's just so much to learn, and every Australian educator should be going to places like that to see what best practice is. And one of my sons works in cybersecurity, and they're encouraged to be innovative and to find out about other things and to we try to shut all that down in Australian education
Outside
because if you're going to dumb down teachers, you don't want them thinking they know what they're talking about.
education. Mm. Yeah. So can you tell
But
us a little bit more about creating schools and where people can find your book and how they can contact you if they want you to come and
here's a copy of it right here. There you go. I didn't know we were going to be on camera, so I didn't.
yeah, creating
But
schools.
yeah, look, it's available in all good bookstores. To use a cliche, it is available in all bookstores. Though, if your bookstore hasn't got it, they can order it quite easily through Melbourne Books.
Yeah.
And Amazon and all those online places have got it as well. It's essentially my co-writer Fab DeGostin, Dr. Fab DeGostin. His PhD was on emotions in education, and he went to Finland with me on my last trip to Finland. He came as well, but I hadn't met. I'd taught with Fab years ago for a while. Then we sort of went our separate ways for a bit. And about 8 or 10 years ago, we met up again, and he was midway through his PhD, and I'd been to Finland. And when I started telling him what the future of education looks like over there, he said, that's exactly what I'm finding in my PhD, that when kids, and it's not rocket science, when the kids enjoy it,
No, it's not.
they learn heaps of stuff and they want to learn more and so on. And when they don't learn much and they don't want to learn any more. That sort of distills it into the as simple as I could put it. And
Yeah.
he went to Finland and he's like, yep, it's all here. They're doing it all. And this is the thing, no matter where you go, best practice is best practice. But some people think that getting a slightly better test mark, if that's your only measurement for how well an education system is doing, like when Finland started topping PISA, there were a lot of Finnish educators who said weren't happy about it because they said our kids are so much more than test results.
Mm.
And it summed it up beautifully. They were talking about the fact that their kids are responsible, that they can walk across town at 7 years of age in the middle of the capital city. They walk to and from school on their own.
Yeah.
They're not carrying on or being silly. They can be trusted in the classroom if the teacher's left for 20 minutes or something, not a problem.
Mm.
Those kind of things are what are important to them, as well as test results and so on. And you know what? If we're employers looking to employ some young people, I know which ones I want to get.
The
I
ones
don't
got,
want the ones who, if when the teacher wasn't in the room, they went stupid, because I'm employing them now. I'm not going to be able to watch them 24/7 or whatever, am I?
so
You know
here,
what I mean?
here's another curly one for you because this is the work I've been trying to do for years, and there's been a lot of resistance from schools, and that is working with parents as partners to be able to develop those skills, the cognitive and non-cognitive skills that can be nurtured at home and at school, and everyone on the same page to focus on the student at the center and what they need to develop to be able to become independent learners. And that is that to me, that is a no-brainer to
What I
work
saw in
on those.
Finland was
Yeah.
parents didn't tend to, they didn't go to the school because they weren't dropping kids off or picking them up, and
But
they tended
what
they
about
tended to
about
they tended to trust the teacher.
yeah.
But as I said, the teacher in Finland is an exceptionally well educated person, who's a real professional, and no one would dream of telling them what to do no more than you dream of walking into the doctor's surgery down there and starting to lecture to the doctor.
Yeah.
Um, and that's because of that trust thing. I mean, every Finnish teacher most of them had experience in other countries, and extremely detailed and um, professional knowledge and so on. You don't get that in Australian educators, and that's one of the messages that I'm trying to get out to Australian educators, is that we need to. I wrote something on LinkedIn the other day. Someone had done a thing talking about the medical profession, and I pointed out that doctors and nurses and so on frequently attend conferences in other cities and other countries and so on, and frequently present at these and so on. Australian teachers don't do that. In Finland, teachers do.
School leaders do, but not necessarily teachers.
And why aren't teachers doing it? What is the point of school leaders being there? You know
Yeah,
what I mean? It's like they're
lead
not the one.
me, but yeah.
You know what I mean? Anyway, yeah, but that's how you get your country's best to want to be teachers.
Mm.
And I remember guys like Eddie Wu, the New South Wales maths guy.
Yeah.
He got like 98 or 97 or something for his A, and he was told, don't waste that kind of an ATAR score on education.
Yeah.
And that's disgraceful. That's just terrible that anyone in Australia would say that. But you know what? My middle son, the one who's in cybersecurity, he'd been um, he'd been headhunted before he'd finished his uni degree. He was working from home 4 days a week, traveling to Melbourne 1 day a week. I'm in Geelong. And then he got headhunted by another company. He's now on, he's only 2 years out of uni on, I think, 120 plus thousand a year. And he still works from home 9 days a fortnight or something. And he's encouraged to be innovative, etc. Why would he want to go into teaching where he's treated like a little kid
Yeah,
and
that's
told
true.
everything he's got to do and micromanaged and so on? It's like,
Mm.
that's not a profession.
Yeah.
And that's what gets me angry in Australia, is that when the teacher is running a classroom or whatever, respect them and respect their professional knowledge and their judgment and their autonomy.
Yeah.
And if they don't, if they think that a kid shouldn't be doing nap plan, they don't do nap plan. End of story. Because they know that student really well. You know what I mean? And we just don't do that in Australia. And I think parents would, if our teachers were given a bit more respect from the community, I think parents would respect them a bit more as well. But that plan tells you don't respect teachers, doesn't it? Tells you we can't trust what they say, so we're going to have to do our own tests.
Well, the research is showing that parents, since COVID, parents' attitudes towards teachers did change, but I
Yeah,
think because a lot of what teachers do is hidden from parents. So we don't necessarily know how intelligent they are or how well they're teaching our children.
yeah, yeah.
Except
I agree.
so parents are positioned in a way that almost forces them to judge the teachers based on their child's results. And that's wrong. That is not how it should be. It should be a relationship between parents and teachers. So they get to know each other, they get to know the family, the parents get to know the teacher, they understand each other. They're working as a team rather than being put in a position of judgment. So that's the I think that is a part of what needs to change in our culture of our schools as well, because we're not necessarily going to create change to the extent of what Finland has done until we start to work together. Because there'll be pushback from parents, there'll be pushback from teachers of, a system, a whole wide system change if it's not a partnership approach and if we don't approach it in a way that is,
At, at the last school that I was teaching at full time, we had the school would bring the parents in at the start of the year, and I was able to get my class's parents in our classroom and sort of, you do that kind of meet and greet at the start. I told them about some of my Finnish stuff. They were rapt. I couldn't get them to leave. They suddenly had a teacher that was interested in the differences, and every one of them knew that their child was an individual, not the
yeah.
same, and couldn't be taught the same. And when I talked about that, so believe me, you don't get any pushback from parents when you try and talk about things that the Finnish do, because all the parents know that their kid is unique. You
Yeah.
know that your child is unique,
As soon as
and
you
all you want is for the system to recognise that.
yeah. I know I've got a whole module on parent knowledge and tapping into parent knowledge of their child so teachers can actually get to know the child better to teach them and build a relationship with them. But there's all different things that are happening, I think, but it's just a matter of chipping away and
Yeah, yeah, it is.
putting our
It
voices
is.
out there to try and create change. But I can feel your passion, and I'm sure my viewers and listeners can feel your passion
Oh,
as well about this.
I'm sorry if I get a bit angry, but
Not at all. It's just
when I see young people's lives ruined, when I see kids who hate maths or hate English or whatever, and I just think
yeah,
you don't really hate them, you hate the way that it's been done. But I also see a system that doesn't care that they don't like it.
mm,
And
yeah,
when all the debate in the media at the moment and through the press is all about direct instruction. I still never hear anyone say, what do the kids think about it?
mm, yeah,
They don't care. They do not give a damn about the kids. And don't tell me that you're child centered if you're not asking the kids what they think, and if you're not breaking out of the standardized curriculum and all this sort of rubbish, because that's what you've got to do if you really care about the kids.
yeah,
Not get an extra counsellor in so that when the kids have had too much, you send them down the hall to the counsellor and then they come back and you keep giving them the standardised curriculum.
yeah,
Go look upstream at what's causing them to be stressed and to need a counsellor. That's what the Finns do. And
yeah.
this is you were talking before about kids with special needs and so on. Those kids don't get into anywhere near as much difficulty when they've got a teacher that's prepared to work on them with them individually,
Yeah, that's right.
and not trying to squeeze them into doing exactly the same as everyone else in the room's doing.
Squeeze them into the box.
Exactly, because those kids are even less likely to fit into the same, hole or whatever that we're talking about.
Yeah,
And this is why um, I have a lot of sympathy for, and you see there's a lot more stuff about special needs kids now, but that's because we're tightening the grip with the standardized curriculum.
Yep.
And that's what's causing that. It's not that those kids have any greater needs, it's that their needs are, their individualism is being even less recognized than it was before,
Yep.
you know?
Well, lucky there's unique individuals like you and I who are trying to change things.
Yes.
Thank you so much for your time today. It's been
No worries. Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad we got it done. I hope I didn't get too emotional or too loud there at any point. They may have set the meters,
there's
the
never
level meters up a little bit.
shows your unique individualism.
Oh, look, I think if we're not absurdly passionate about this, nothing will happen because I see so many educators who are just rolling along. And I was the same. I was rolling along. I didn't know that. And this is the thing: if people don't know that there's another way you can do it, it's hard to ask why they aren't doing anything different. And
Yeah.
most Australians don't.
It
We
just
don't know much about it.
well, it takes risk takers and people who are courageous to take that next step. And
Yeah, and yeah. All right.
all
See you
right,
later, Rachel.
see you soon. Thanks again. What another inspiring interview in our Leadership in Education series of our Creating Connections podcast. If you enjoyed this interview and would like to learn more from other leaders in education, please click on the subscribe button to receive further podcasts on your feed. If you'd like to be a guest on our podcast, click on the link below to book a meeting with me to learn more about you and your leadership in education. Or if you're listening to this podcast, send an email to rachel@practicallylearning.com.au to express your interest in being on the podcast. If you are a school leader or teacher with aspirations for leadership, but you're challenged with self-doubt, overwhelm, and whether you have what it takes to take that next step, our Connect with Your Mind Mastery Coaching Program can support you to work on your own self-mastery to become the leader you aspire to be. For further information about our coaching and professional learning programs, please visit our website at practicallylearning.com.au or click on one of the links below and visit our podcast for our future series of interviews to support you as the adults who are guiding children on their learning journey. I do hope you enjoy the rest of our episodes on our Creating Connections podcast, and I hope to meet you soon.